It was a chilly evening in London, the kind where the streetlights flickered through a thin veil of mist, and the distant hum of the city felt oddly melancholic. Michael Depar, known to the world as Big Shaq, sat behind the wheel of a sleek black cab, his fingers tapping rhythmically against the steering wheel. Tonight was different. For the past few weeks he had been secretly driving a taxi, not for money, not for fame, but for something more profound. He wanted to experience life from a different perspective, to see the world through the eyes of the ordinary, to connect with people who had no idea who he was. As he adjusted the rearview mirror, a tall, lean man in his mid-30s approached the cab hesitantly. His face was gaunt, his suit slightly wrinkled, as if he had been wearing it for days. The man's eyes held a distant emptiness, the kind that comes from carrying too many burdens. Michael pressed the unlock button, and the man hesitated before pulling open the door and sliding into the back seat. "Where to, boss?" Michael asked, his usual lively tone slightly subdued. The man exhaled heavily, staring at his phone screen before muttering, "Greenwich, near the old docks." Michael nodded and pulled into the flow of evening traffic. Silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Normally he would crack a joke, lighten the mood, but something about this man told him that tonight wasn't the night for his usual antics. A few minutes passed before Michael decided to break the silence. "Long day at work?" the man scoffed, his lips twisting into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Something like that." Michael glanced at him through the rearview mirror. "You sound like a man who's had better days." The man let out a bitter chuckle. "You could say that." He paused, then sighed. "I just got fired." Michael raised an eyebrow. "Damn! Sorry to hear that, bro. What happened?" The man hesitated for a moment before answering. "It's complicated, but in simple terms, I trusted the wrong people. Gave everything to a company that saw me as nothing more than a replaceable part." Michael nodded slowly, understanding all too well how brutal the corporate world could be. "Sounds rough, man. What's next?" The man let out a hollow laugh. "Next? There is no next. That job was everything. I worked my way up from nothing. No family, no backup plan. Just me and that job." He exhaled sharply, his fingers gripping his phone tightly. "Now? I don't even know where I'll be tomorrow." Michael's fingers drummed against the wheel as he took a sharp turn down a quieter road. "So you're telling me that after one setback, it's game over? That's it?" The man clenched his jaw. "It's not just a setback, it's my whole life. You don't understand." Michael let out a small chuckle. "Try me." The man looked up, his tired eyes meeting Michael's through the mirror. For the first time, there was a flicker of curiosity. "Who are you, man? You're not like other cab drivers." Michael grinned, but didn't answer directly. Instead, he shrugged. "Let's just say I've been around, seen things. And one thing I know for sure, life only beats you if you let it." The man sighed, rubbing his temples. "It's not that simple." Michael nodded. "It never is. But here's the thing, my guy, you're still breathing. That means you're not out of the game yet." The man let out a deep sigh, staring out the window as the city lights blurred past. "Maybe." For the first time in a long while, he wasn't completely sure if all hope was lost. The rhythmic hum of the engine filled the silence as the cab rolled down the nearly empty London streets. The man in the back seat, who still hadn't given his name, leaned his head against the window, watching the streetlights flicker past. His thoughts were a tangled mess, drowning in disappointment, frustration, and a creeping sense of hopelessness. Michael adjusted the rearview mirror slightly, watching him. There was something about this guy, something familiar. Not in the sense that he knew him, but in the way broken people carried themselves, like shadows hanging over their own existence. "You know," Michael began, his tone casual, "whenever life kicks you in the teeth, you've got two options. You can lie there, bleeding, or you can get up and spit the blood right back in its face." The man let out a small, humorless chuckle. "That easy, huh?" "I never said it was easy," Michael replied. "But it's a choice. And choices, my friend, are what separate the ones who make it from the ones who don't." The man shook his head, rubbing his temples. "You talk like you've been through it yourself." Michael smirked. "Would you believe me if I told you I once had nothing?" The man turned to face the driver properly for the first time that night. His brow furrowed in mild disbelief. "Nothing?" Michael nodded. "Nothing. No big breaks, no fame, no money, just a guy trying to figure things out. And trust me, I had my fair share of setbacks." The man scoffed. "Yeah? Like what?" Michael let out a small sigh, gripping the wheel tighter. "Let's just say people only see the success. They don't see the nights I spent wondering if I'd ever make it. The doors slammed in my face. The times I thought maybe I wasn't good enough." He glanced at the man through the mirror. "Sound familiar?" The man was silent for a moment. Then, with a reluctant nod, he admitted, "Yeah, it does." Michael took a left turn, taking the long route toward Greenwich. This conversation needed time. "What's your name, bro?" The man hesitated before answering. "Daniel." Michael smiled. "All right, Daniel, let me ask you something. That job you lost, was it really the thing keeping you alive? Or was it just something you convinced yourself you needed?" Daniel blinked, thrown off by the question. "What kind of question is that?" "The kind that makes you think," Michael replied. "Did you actually love that job, or did you just love the security it gave you?" Daniel opened his mouth to respond, but hesitated. No one had ever asked him that before. He had worked at the company for 10 years, sacrificing weekends, relationships, his health. All for what? A paycheck? A title? The illusion of stability? His silence was answer enough. Michael nodded knowingly. "See, that's the thing. Sometimes we hold on to things not because they're good for us, but because we're scared of what happens if we let go." Daniel exhaled sharply. "But what if I have nothing left? No job, no family, no backup plan. Where do I even go from here?" Michael grinned. "Anywhere you want, bro. That's the beauty of hitting rock bottom. There's nowhere to go but up." Daniel let out a tired chuckle, shaking his head. "You make it sound so simple." "Nah," Michael admitted. "It's going to be hard as hell, but let me ask you this. What do you actually want to do with your life?" Daniel hesitated. No one had asked him that in years. He had spent so much time climbing the corporate ladder, he never stopped to think if it was even a ladder he wanted to climb. I used to love writing," he finally admitted. "Before all this. Before the long hours, the stress, the promotions that never seemed to matter. I wanted to write books, stories that meant something." Michael grinned. "Then maybe this whole thing ain't a loss. Maybe it's a reset." Daniel frowned. "A reset?" "Yeah, man. Life has a way of shaking you up when you get too comfortable. Maybe losing this job is the best thing that could have happened to you. Maybe it's a chance to finally do what you actually love." Daniel shook his head, the idea almost laughable. "How am I supposed to start over at my age? With no money, no connections?" Michael chuckled. "Bruh, let me tell you something. You know who Colonel Sanders is?" Daniel raised an eyebrow. "The KFC guy?" Michael nodded. "Yeah. You know how old he was when he started KFC? 65. Daniel blinked. "No way." "Facts, my guy. Dude got rejected over 1,000 times before someone finally gave his recipe a chance. Now look at KFC, worldwide. Imagine if he had said, 'I'm too old to start over.'" Daniel leaned back in his seat, staring at the roof of the cab. 65. Michael smirked. Exactly. You're what, mid-30s? You got decades ahead of you. If you really wanted to, you could change your whole life starting tonight. Daniel let that sink in. Could he really? Could he take this disaster and turn it into an opportunity? For the first time since he got into the cab, a spark of something flickered in his eyes, hope. "But what if I fail?" he whispered. Michael chuckled. "Then you fail and you try again, but at least you won't live with regret, wondering what could have been." The cab slowed as they neared Greenwich. Michael could feel the shift in Daniel's energy. He was still lost, still uncertain, but there was a crack in the walls he had built around himself. A small but significant shift. Michael knew his job wasn't done yet. This was just the beginning. The cab slowed to a stop near a quiet street in Greenwich. The soft glow of streetlights illuminated the pavement, casting long shadows as the city slept. Daniel exhaled, rubbing his temples. His mind was still spinning from the conversation. Michael turned in his seat slightly, giving Daniel a knowing look. "You feel it, don't you?" Daniel furrowed his brows. "Feel what?" "That little voice in your head. The one that's been buried under responsibilities, self-doubt and routine. It's waking up." Daniel chuckled dryly. "You make it sound so dramatic." Michael smirked. "It is dramatic, Bruce. You ever seen a butterfly come out of its cocoon? That ain't some peaceful process. It's a fight." Daniel sighed, staring out of the window. "Even if I wanted to start over, I wouldn't even know where to begin." Michael leaned back, drumming his fingers on the steering wheel. "Let's say you were given a golden opportunity right now, something that could change everything. Would you take it?" Daniel hesitated, then nodded. "I mean, yeah, if it was real." Michael grinned. "Good, because I've got a challenge for you." Daniel's head snapped up. "A challenge?" Michael nodded, his eyes gleaming with mischief. "Yup. See that cafe across the street?" He pointed toward a small, cozy-looking coffee shop. The lights were still on, a few people inside, chatting softly over warm drinks. "What about it?" Daniel asked. Michael reached into his pocket and pulled out a crisp £50 note. He held it up between two fingers. "Go in there, buy yourself a coffee, and start writing. Right now." Daniel blinked. "You can't be serious." Michael's face didn't waver. "Dead serious. You said you used to love writing. Prove it. Sit in that cafe for 1 hour and start your first story." Daniel scoffed. "I haven't written in years. I wouldn't even know what to write about." Michael shrugged. "Then write about this. Tonight. This cab ride. Your thoughts. Your fears. Just put words on a page." Daniel stared at the money in Michael's hand, then at the cafe. "What's the catch?" Michael chuckled. "No catch, bruv. Just a test. If you can sit in there for an hour and write, no excuses, no distractions, I guarantee you'll feel different when you walk out." Daniel hesitated. The idea felt ridiculous. Writing wouldn't fix his problems. It wouldn't get his job back, wouldn't pay his rent, wouldn't erase years of frustration. And yet, there was something about the way Michael spoke, something that made him believe just for a second that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't as lost as he thought. Daniel sighed. "Fine. But if I go in there and make a fool of myself, you owe me another ride home." Michael laughed. "Deal. Now go before I change my mind." Daniel took the money, shoved it into his pocket, and stepped out of the cab. Michael watched him through the windshield as he hesitated in front of the cafe door. "This is it, bro," he thought. "This is your moment." Daniel took a deep breath, pushed open the door, and stepped inside. Michael smiled. The first step was always the hardest, but Daniel had just taken it. The small cafe smelled of freshly brewed coffee and warm pastries. The soft hum of conversation filled the air, blending with the quiet jazz playing from a vintage speaker in the corner. Daniel hesitated just past the doorway, clutching the £50 note in his pocket. What am I even doing here? The logical side of his mind told him this was pointless, but deep down another voice whispered, "Just try." Daniel stepped toward the counter. A young barista with red hair and tired eyes greeted him. "What can I get you?" she asked. Daniel glanced at the menu. He wasn't even thirsty. He just needed something to justify sitting here. "Just a black coffee, please." She nodded, rang up his order, and took the cash. A moment later, he had a steaming cup in hand. Now came the hard part. He scanned the cafe. Most of the tables were taken, students cramming for exams, a couple laughing softly in the corner, an elderly man reading a newspaper. In the farthest corner, next to a foggy window, was an empty table. Perfect. He settled into the chair, pulled out a napkin, and tapped his fingers on the table. Now what? He had no notebook, no laptop, just his thoughts and the weight of years of hesitation. He could feel Michael's challenge looming over him. Daniel took a deep breath, reached into his pocket, and pulled out an old receipt. He smoothed it out on the table, then borrowed a pen from the counter. "Just write," he told himself. "Anything." He started with a single sentence. A man sits in a cab, unaware that his life is about to change forever. The words surprised him. He stared at them, heart pounding. It was messy, rushed, but it was something. And so he wrote more. Sentence after sentence spilled onto the paper, his mind unlocking doors that had been shut for years. He wrote about the cab ride, about Michael's strange way of speaking, about the weight of failure and the longing for something more. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about deadlines or rent or lost opportunities. He was just writing. Minutes turned into an hour, then an hour and a half. When Daniel finally looked up, his coffee was cold, and the cafe was nearly empty. His hands ached, but his heart felt light. He had done it. The unexpected visitor. As he stretched his fingers, the cafe door swung open. A gust of cold air rushed in, and in walked Michael. Daniel blinked in surprise. "You're still here?" Michael grinned. "Told you I'd wait. So how was it?" Daniel hesitated, then pushed the napkin toward him. "See for yourself." Michael picked it up, his eyes scanning the scribbled sentences. Slowly, his grin widened. "Bruv, this is fire." Daniel let out a breathy laugh. "It's messy. It's real." Michael placed the napkin down. "That's what matters." Daniel leaned back, rubbing his temples. "I don't know what's happening, man. I came here feeling lost. And now, I don't know. I feel different." Michael nodded knowingly. "That's because you finally listened to yourself." Daniel ran a hand through his hair. "But what now? I can't just quit everything and become a writer overnight." Michael tapped the napkin. "You don't have to. But you took the first step, and that's more than most people ever do." Daniel exhaled. "Yeah, I guess." Michael leaned forward. "Bruv, let me ask you something. What's stopping you from writing every day? Not for money? Not for a career? Just for yourself?" Daniel hesitated. "Nothing, I guess." Michael smirked. "Exactly." Daniel stared at the table, thoughts racing. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel stuck. He felt free.